With this Shabbat weekly Torah reading, we are deep into the story of the Exodus. The Sedra, the Torah portion, starts with the plague of locust, followed by the penultimate one, darkness. That plague has always troubled me, especially since, according to the rabbis, each plague was supposed to be more devastating than the previous one. Darkness, therefore, is the worst plague next to the slaying of the firstborn. Really? As our Torah commentary that we use at our synagogue each Saturday notes, during all the other plagues, the average Egyptian could do almost nothing to protect himself or herself. But with darkness, what, they didn't have candles? They couldn't make a fire? The plague of darkness may have been an inconvenience, but how devastating was that plague? And that's why I like to focus and look at the plague differently, a little more homiletically. I want to look at two particular phrases in this plague, as it's written in the Torah, that I think can be read maybe more instructive for our society. It says in Exodus chapter 10, verse 22, that Moses held out his arm toward the sky, and thick darkness descended upon the land of Egypt for 3 days. And then in verse 23, it says, Lo ra'u ish et achiv. People did not see one another. Velo ka'amu ish mitachtav shloshet yamim. And for 3 days, no one arose from their place. People did not see one another. No one arose from his place. It's an interesting choice of words. Egypt was collapsing, and no one saw his neighbor. There was no one there to help another. No one saw the pain that their neighbor was going through. No one left his home to help his fellow Egyptian. That is a devastating plague on a society. There is no greater darkness on a community than one in which people become oblivious to the needs of his or her neighbor. I want to imagine that darkness was indeed devastating to Egypt. Maybe not in a physical sense, but a societal one. By the 9th plague, we saw what had happened to Egypt. People had completely stopped caring for one another and for those in need. In Egypt, it all started by mistreating the other, the Israelite, the stranger, the different. And now it had become a society of every person for himself. Egyptians did not see one another. They became blind, dark to the needs of their own neighbors. They heard the cries of anguish of their fellow Egyptians, but they were holed up in their own homes. No one arose to help. With the 9th plague, a society that hated the stranger was now a completely inward society. No thought about the person next door. My friends, it starts with the stranger. It ends with the neighbor. That's what had broken down in Egypt. After centuries of oppression, no Egyptian would even get up and see if their neighbor was okay after the last calamity. No one left his home. That's the worst plague. A plague brought on by their own selfishness. Egypt was now surrounded by societal darkness. Terrible, self-centered darkness. You can't build. You can't maintain a society that way. My friends, let this never happen in our country. Let us push back when we hear, why should we help others? We have our own needs. We can't help everyone. It always starts that way, and it's understandable. But we know from experience that such an inward society eventually consumes itself and collapses. It narrows and eventually turns on itself. Generosity, kindness, caring, that knows no border, no nationality, no zip code, that enriches and expands a civilization. We are ultimately one human race. And when we see anyone as undesirable, unworthy of love and support, we not only fail as a moral nation, but we, like Egypt, will eventually pay a price. We soon become blind to our own neighbors, deaf to the cries of everyone. As long as we're a society who sees the humanity in all and see their tragedy as our own, as long as there are people who see others as brothers, we will be a society worthy of God's light. May God help us all walk, even in the darkness, and be a light for everyone we meet. Shabbat Shalom.